Aloha, filmmakers and storytellers. Welcome to episode 3 of Action Movies Storytelling Through Action. So, I'm Matthew Salanoa, director of the award-winning 007 I Only Need One. If you want to check that out, that is in my playlist for Matthew J. Salanoa, director, on the main channel. I have been a student of film since I was 13 years old. I discovered I wanted to make movies at that age, and luckily, when I entered the 9th grade, there was a class project that actually required a video to be done. It was everyone had to make a team. We had to make a little group. It was a group project, and one person could be the leader and make the video how they wanted. So because I'd already sort of found my love for film, I took that opportunity and I led the group, and I ended up making, while it's quite quaint for the adult audience, for the 13, 14-year-olds in the class, what I ended up making was a fairly cinematic experience for the class. And it was the first time I'd made a video, but not only the first time I'd made a video, it was the first time I had heard people kind of sigh and go, oh my God, it looks like a real movie. And granted, no, it doesn't really look like a real movie, but I am making certain choices in that short film that was just supposed to be a simple class project where people just read a scene from Romeo and Juliet. It's supposed to be a confidence building project for, because it was a literature class. It's supposed to be a confidence building project for you to both read the material but be comfortable speaking in front of others. Like my teacher, Miss Reed, she was just really a brilliant teacher. And so I wanted to get into that a little bit, but most importantly, I wanted to get into what inspired me to make movies in the first place, And so this is my last sort of orientation episode. These first 3 orientation episodes, the first episode is how does action define character? The second episode is really looking at how the action plays a role in the larger story. And also, the second episode, I tried to stress that this is how a director should look at a movie. So if you want to be a director, if you want to be a filmmaker, but especially if you want to be a director, this podcast is for you. I am making this for the 13-year-old version of myself who, I had a couple of DVDs, but that's all I had. So if you're a young filmmaker and you want to make action movies, you think that's what you want to do, and you think you want to be a director, then especially this episode is a great place to start, because I'm just going to be going over, this whole podcast is me going over a compendium of what I've learned over the years and what's helped me, gain clients that I had for years. I worked as a video editor, freelance. I had clients for years because I had a strength that from my very first short film and leading into other projects I made in high school, I had a natural strength for editing, but also just storytelling. And I want to stress that storytelling is what's going to define you amongst every other filmmaker. But I'm not so interested in competition. I have not worked in the industry, but I have worked. I have worked for many years, and still to this day, I find myself helping other peers from college and stuff like that. Still to this day, I'm helping people find their creative voice or find the most effective way to tell their stories, because that is my specialty. My specialty is looking at a story and seeing how it can be told best. That's what I've gained over the years. That's why I love directing, is that a director and an editor, and the editing was my bread and butter for many years, a director and an editor should understand what you're doing with storytelling. And I'm attacking action movies because I grew up on action movies. I love action movies. I wouldn't call myself the biggest action movie fan. I really love superhero movies. but superhero movies are action movies, just dressed up in, colorful costumes. And with that being in mind, I want to talk to you about two seminal films without which I may have never discovered that I want to be a filmmaker. And what I learned from the making of these movies, it was the making of them that got me to realize this is something I can do. This is something I want to do. And if I just have the right mindset, it's totally achievable. So the two movies I'm going to talk about today are Blade 2 and The Matrix. So The Matrix came out when I was about 9 or 10. Blade 2 came out just about the age of 12. Let me just tell you, Blade 2 is my first Guillermo del Toro movie. It's also my first Blade movie because I didn't see the first one yet. I saw Blade 2 first. What happened was I had insomnia in 8th grade. And it was getting toward the end of 8th grade, or maybe it was even the summer after 8th grade. I can't remember, but I had horrible insomnia. I couldn't sleep. And then, I was lucky to have a TV in my room and cable, and so I couldn't sleep, and I just turned on the TV, and Blade was on. Blade, I didn't even realize it was the beginning. I thought I missed something. It was the exact beginning of the movie. We're introduced to this junky-looking vampire who starts biting vampires, and then there's blood and gore, but visually the movie just looks like some kind of painting. You know what I mean? The movie just had something about it that was very visually appealing to me, and I wanted to know why. So eventually I got the DVD for Blade 2, watched it all the way through, and was just blown away, at the correct aspect ratio also. But I was just blown away by this movie and how beautiful it was. So I watched the commentary. My first commentary was actually the Matrix commentary, but I'll get to that later. I think I really want to start off, you guys. If you want to learn how directing works, this is a good episode for that, because I'm gonna talk about sort of the building blocks of that and how I learned it from Guillermo del Toro's DVD commentary. If you have access to this, I recommend you watch that. You don't have to watch that before this, but if you would rather watch that instead of this, you're going to learn 100 times more than what I have to say. So by all means, go watch that. Truly, if you want to learn what makes a good movie and why, the why is so important. You got to learn from filmmakers themselves. I know a lot of, especially you young people, are growing up with movie reviewers, and some of them are very entertaining, and they have a lot of spunk, and they're fun to watch, and they have a lot of opinions on movies. And you may find yourself changing your opinion about a movie, or maybe you're on the fence about a movie, and then you see this YouTuber with all this opinion, and they say something that seems to make sense to you, and that becomes your opinion. But I urge you that while you are young right now, to not listen to that person. If you think you want to make movies, and it may be boring, if you think you want to make movies, listen to filmmakers themselves. And I say the best resource is a commentary that plays over the movie. Watch the movie first, and especially this helps if you actually like the movie. If you really like a movie, if you love a movie, watch that commentary. Watch the movie, watch the commentary, and you will learn so much about how this actually works and how it's actually practically achievable for you. And Blade 2 was the movie that made that possible for me. So I wanted those first 2 episodes of my podcast, if you haven't watched them, or if you have, the first 2 episodes of my podcast, I'm just trying to get you in the mindset of how a filmmaker should be looking at movies. That you need to look at a movie as a storyteller, because film is just an art medium. It's no different than the canvas of a painting or your sketchbook. It's a medium through which you can tell stories visually, and that's how you need to start looking at this. This is storytelling. A lot of reviewers talk about plot, and what you need to understand is that if you're listening to a real filmmaker, the filmmaker rarely mentions plot. The filmmaker talks about storytelling. The plot is simply a motivational device to enable storytelling to occur. And so if you're hung up on plot, that's because you're watching Mission Impossible sequels and Fast and the Furious, and there really isn't much story to grab onto, so you have no choice but to think about the plot. But truth be told, even those movies, the best of them, they do try to talk about some level of storytelling or give you some kind of emotional experience, and that's why you're really feeling it. And the emotional experience, storytelling, is what I'm getting into. Action movies, storytelling through action. How does the action tell the story? That's what I'm here to talk about. If you don't think action movies are legitimate cinema, I'm hoping to change your mind by the end of every single episode. But most importantly, if you're a filmmaker, even if you're already working in the industry, this is just a little wake-up call. Like, don't sit there thinking that action should only be spectacle. Action should absolutely mean something to your characters. And Blade 2 is the movie where I learned that, where it was cemented in stone to me that action is not just for fun, no matter how good it looks. It's still a part of telling the character's journey. And Blade 2 has so many lessons, especially if you listen to that commentary. And I'm just going to be doing this off of memory because I've watched that commentary maybe 4 or 5 times. The director's commentary from Guillermo del Toro that he has with Peter Frankfurt, I learned so much. And if you get the Blu-ray, Del Toro has a new commentary where he kind of fleshes out in more details more of his directorial thoughts that went into the movie. But the more entertaining commentary is with Peter Frankfurt. That's the best one. So here we go. Let's get into Blade 2, and we're going to talk about how does action play a role in storytelling. It's so crucial to understand this. Blade 1 and Blade 2 are hallmark movies that everyone who's a fan of superheroes, most people, adore these movies. And Blade 3 gets a lot of flack. It's not as good as the first two. Maybe I'll talk about it at some point, but still to this day, I think Blade 3 is still better than Ghost Rider 1 or 2. So that's something. But at the end of the day, look, I've talked about the first Blade and what the action means to the character in that movie. But Blade 2 is truly an exercise in finding ways to tell the action effectively, emotionally, and true to the character. So let's get into this movie. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'm going to totally be spoiling this movie, especially the first half, because I think that's where all the juiciest lessons are. But I think, doesn't matter. Go watch the movie if you haven't seen it. You can watch it first, whatever. Let's get into this Blade movie. I love Blade, all right? This is the movie that made me love Blade. And Del Toro being the director, if you know his work, you know he has a visual style that's unmistakable. But this is the movie where he developed his craft. Craft is something I'll get into more later. But essentially, so when this movie starts, and I'm just going to talk about Blade's action scenes in particular. I'm not going to talk about the villains or anything like that. When the movie starts and we introduce Blade, we start off with 2 vampires running, and the camera work is moving along with them. And then they run past camera, and then the camera pushes forward, and then we see Blade appear from the end of this hallway. He comes out of the darkness, and a couple more vampires show up, and they have guns, and Blade draws his gun first and guns them down. And immediately you see amazing sparks pop out of the vampires, and they explode into fiery ash. And so right from this first shot, what's happening is visual storytelling, right? Vampires are scared of Blade. When Blade shoots them, they burst into horrific flames. So we have world building, we have the establishing of the rules of how vampires work in this world, and we're literally just getting right to it. And when the first 2 vampires we see reach the end of the hallway, it's a door to a fire escape. They go down the fire escape. And then Blade, we follow from behind, and he does this amazing leap where he flips anime style, and the camera is following him, rotates around him, all at seemingly real speed. and then he hits the ground in a perfect superhero landing, and then he pulls out his gun and fires the gun, and then we follow the bullet of the gun as it hits one of those vampires, and then we watch that vampire again explode into beautiful explosive ash. And the other vampire that is running away, Blade catches up to the other vampire, tortures him a little bit, and the vampire says, "We just found him. We just found him. He already turned, and then we captured him." And the very following scene, there's a knock on a door. We're seeing vampires doing blood cocaine or blood heroin. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And it's the vampire that Blade caught, and he says, "Let me in. My name is Rush. It's me." And as soon as they unlock the door, and when we see these vampires, we're not seeing Blade and that guy outside the door. We're just seeing the scene from the point of view of the vampires doing their blood drugs, and they're in some kind of factory. We don't know exactly where they are, but we know they're in some kind of industrial factory. So we're seeing the scene from their point of view until they unlock the door, and then there's gunfire. The first vampire who unlocked the door explodes into ash, and the door bursts open, blowing the ashy parts of that vampire into even more dust. And Blade rushes in and guns down the other vampires. And he's very quick, he's very efficient. We get a couple more action scenes with other vampires, but in every single kill, Blade is quick, he's efficient, and these things are important. And then when he's finally done with all of his vampire killing, he leaves the guy he tortured to be alive. "I'll deal with you later." And then where does he go? He goes into a very dark room with this giant man-sized vat of blood, and in that vat of blood is Chris Christopherson, Whistler. And we come to realize that everything Blade's been doing, he's been looking for Whistler. So let's walk this back a bit, okay? This is our opening introduction action sequence with Blade. And although, yes, it's visually very cool, but how is I describing the action? How is the action performed? The action is performed quickly, violently, efficiently. Blade does not care about these vampires, and he loves killing them with style. You know, I didn't even talk about the introduction of the boomerang blade that he slings around, and it comes back to him and cuts up other vampires. But that doesn't matter. The point of my description is that he kills them efficiently, quickly, and we're also visually establishing the rules of how vampires explode when struck with silver bullets. This is how this world works. But also, Blade as a character is killing these vampires as quickly and efficiently as possible, not just because that's who he is, but because he's trying to get to Whistler, that he has an objective. And as soon as he finds Whistler, that cold, steely exterior, it sheds just a bit. And his one line is, "Look what they've done to you." And now he slows down, and he becomes the samurai version of himself there. He's found his master in a very bad place. He cuts these tubes that they have plugged into him and catches them falling. And we get this little moment where Whistler, who's so out of it, he's basically been sedated, and they have him in the blood. And they just have a little moment where Whistler's eyes open and he sees Blade, and Blade looks back at him. And although Blade, Wesley Snipes, has sunglasses on, his silence and his stillness really speaks volumes to the love and respect there is. And I know that sounds bizarre, but this is an action movie. This is the action genre. And typically action heroes, again, they speak through behavior. I'm going to talk a little bit about society. I'm going to back up a little bit out of this movie and talk about society. And frequently, they say men are like cats and women. They say men and women are like cats and dogs. Men are like dogs. Women are like cats. We're very different people. There's a lot of talk in the world about how men are not expected to express themselves, but they're not taught to express themselves verbally. If you notice, when you're a kid and a boy likes you, he picks on you, and then when you become a teenager, he might give you a sweet little gift that maybe you like, maybe you don't. A boy expresses himself through behavior, and it's girls and women typically who express themselves verbally, clearly, and this is part of our disconnect. But if you take just that societal notion into account, that is what the action movie represents to men who watch it. That's why men get it, because we understand. We understand instinctively that Blade don't care about those vampires, but the fact that he slows down and he's careful with Whistler means that he cares about Whistler, because that's how his behavior shows his concern. Okay? So this is not just me talking about the movie, right? This is a reflection of basic fundamental humanity and how it is represented out there in the world. So, and I grew up, and my dad himself, he was he was a little bit stoic. He didn't express his emotions so much, but he showed that he loved us or cared about us by always being there for me and my sisters, getting us to school, getting us to work. But when we were afraid to drive, he never hesitated to make sure at least we got done what we needed to get done. He didn't say the words, "I love you" very much, but he showed it by showing up and getting us what we needed. We were hungry, he got us food. You know what I mean? And it's behavior. That's how you understand what a man thinks, is how he behaves. Not by what he says, but how he behaves. And that is the language through which action expresses our heroes. Yes, every man, or most types of people who consider themselves men, the fantasy of being this amazing action hero who can do acrobatics and blow apart people and not care. This goes back to Schwarzenegger, this goes back to John Wayne. That's a natural fantasy of our need to be a protector. But at the same time, it's a communicator. Like, we don't care about the enemy. But when we slow down and we take care of you, that's us showing that we care about you. So I just wanted to hit that point home. That, again, this is an action movie, but it speaks to fundamental humanity. That's something you have to understand. That while you may look at an action movie or a blockbuster as just some fun thing for the kids to look at, like a fireworks show, and granted, there's some of that, fundamental humanity and personal concern, this goes into movies. It may not seem like that to you, because on your side as the consumer, you're trained to think that this is just for me. This is visual popcorn for my eyeballs, and that's all it's there for. And yet, when you love an action movie, why do you love it? That love and the reason why is entirely unspoken for the most part, because you are just watching people look out for each other and care about each other. They won't say the words, but they're doing it. And you realize by the movie's end whether these people are still going to be friends or however it's going to work out. That's what affects you, and that's what I'm going to get to when I'm talking about the end of this movie. So again, right off the bat, the action communicates the intention or the emotion of the character. So Blade is killing vampires dispassionately. He gets Whistler. He's gentle and tender with Whistler, and that physical behavior is an action, right? It's not a violence, but it's a physical action that displays his love and concern for his mentor and father figure. And then when we get to the next scene, Blade takes Whistler to his hideout, his giant industrial hideout, where he's got his gadgets, and young Norman Reedus as Scud is his new car guy / gadget guy, because Whistler in the end of Blade 1, Whistler died, or it seemed like he died. Only sadly, unfortunately, for us to find out and for Blade to find out that Whistler had actually disappeared, became a vampire, and has been with the vampires for 2 years. So when Blade comes back to his hideout, we meet Scud, Whistler. There's a beautiful. This is one of the sequences that really got me to appreciate the movie. Is that there's this beautiful lighting, this control of light and dark. I'm gonna get to that later. Where again, it looks like a painting. I can't tell you why it looks like a painting, but Whistler's put in this very dark room. Blade goes to his room and he pulls out the gun that was used to kill Whistler. And we get the flashback to the first Blade movie when Blade finds Whistler beaten up and bitten, and Whistler tells him to give him his gun. Blade gives Whistler the gun, and Blade says, "What are you still doing here? Go away, you idiot." And Blade walks away, and as he's walking away, Whistler shoots himself so that he doesn't, become a vampire. And it's just a very emotional sequence in that movie, but that gunshot becomes the cut. So again, film technique, very important. The gunshot becomes the cut that brings us back to the present in Blade 2, where now it's morning, and Blade goes downstairs, he opens the slats that lets daylight in, and he walks over and finds that Whistler is no longer sitting where he was sitting before, but now Whistler's sitting in the shade, but his feet are out and exposed into the sun. He's not burning up, so Blade had given him a vampire cure, I forgot to say that. And so Whistler's cured from his vampirism, and they start talking. Whistler reveals that he turned, and they've basically been draining him and asking him and trying to get information out of him for the last 2 years. And Blade explains, yeah, they were moving you around. I've been running all over Europe trying to find you. And that's when we get introduced to Scud, Norman Reedus, who immediately Whistler and Scud don't agree because Scud's a young guy. He's very careless with how he treats Blade's car. He's just tossing tools around, and he just has no respect for what he's doing. And Blade and Whistler is immediately irritated by this. And that Whistler's expressing his irritation and annoyance. Blade is not. That too should be a clue for things we'll learn later. But then all of a sudden, as Whistler's screaming at Scud, "How could you be like this? You're such an idiot. What are you doing?" All of a sudden, the alarm lights go on, and then Scud looks at the computers. It's vampires. They've broken in. They found us. And then Blade just all of a sudden flies up a wall. It's crawling. He doesn't fly, but he's crawling up a wall so fast he looks like he's flying. And then we cut to another amazing shot where CGI is utilized, where the camera is just sort of slowly gliding underneath the rafter bars of the ceiling of the industrial hideout. And then you're seeing these vampires in clad black outfits. They look like ninjas with cool little red goggles, and they're just acrobatically flipping and hopping from bar to bar. And then they get over the little area where Whistler and Scud are, and they drop down. And immediately Whistler fires at them. Defensively, one of the vampires disarms Whistler and knocks him to the ground. Then Blade shows up with his sword, and the other vampire looks at him. She also has a sword and draws her sword, and they both have a moment between each other. And literally, the other vampire who took Whistler's gun is like, "Hey, stop, don't fight." And then the other vampire just immediately engages in a fight with Blade. And now this fight is a little more dance-like. It's a little more stylized. It's a little more relaxed than the other fight. And you're really just seeing kind of this dramatic sparring match between Blade and this other vampire. You can kind of tell from her the shape of her body, and it's a woman. But you just don't see her face because she's still got the mask on. But it's like this very, very cool battle between the two of them. But it's a battle that ultimately ends with both of them having their swords at each other, him to her neck and her to his groin, and the battle ends with them both at a standstill, meaning that Blade has met his match. He has met his equal in battle. So when the fight stops, it stops right there because the other vampire says, stop, wait, don't kill each other. We have a message from the vampire people, and they stop, they turn the regular lights back on, and the vampire Blade was fighting pulls off her mask, and she's this beautiful woman, and Blade says nothing, but he just has this long look at her, and she kind of has a long look back at him. There's chemistry. This is the first vampire that Blade's ever met who actually fought him to a stalemate, where both of them could have had the killing blow on each other. This would have been the end of Blade and the end of the movie. So this is something important to talk about, okay? The first scene, Blade kills people quick, efficiently, because emotionally, he does not care. He's after Whistler. But what does that also say about the movie? That the action scene itself is being dealt with from an emotional standpoint. That the way he fights has everything to do with his emotional point of view and his goal or his intention to get to someone he cares about. And what were my rules? Remember, I have a rubric that I established in the previous episode, which is 1, how does action define character? 2, how does the action scene affect the rest of the movie? And 3, what are the consequences of the violence? And so, while Blade feels no consequences of the violence when it comes to killing the vampires, what he discovers is Whistler having been horribly abused by the vampires, and his only expression of this absolute disgust, horror, and anger is, Whistler, what have they done to you? And again, he treats him very tenderly. His physical actions, even outside of the action scene, depict his character and his concern. And then when we look at this fight, it's a completely different style of fight, where it's more of a spar, where these two are having fun, where the other vampire does try to jump in and help out. Nyssa is the girl vampire. Her male escort is her guardian. He does try to step in and stop Blade, but Blade just knocks him aside like he's nothing. Because really, only Nyssa, who we find out is like the princess of the European vampires, only she is able to keep up with him in battle. And that this is where the commentary is very important, because everything that I just said is what Guillermo del Toro says in his commentary. Okay? When I talked about Face Off in the last episode, everything that I was talking about how important the emotion was from John Woo's commentary on the Face Off DVD. So I am not just here to analyze as if I'm so divine. I'm the divine podcaster who understands movies better than George Lucas does. That's bullshit. That's utter bullshit. If you haven't done George Lucas's homework, then you're not George Lucas and you don't understand Star Wars the way he does. That's bullshit. And again, action movies, just spectacle. There's no story, there's emotion. That's bullshit too. Okay? Some movies, the action movies that are like that, you have forgotten about. You don't remember them. They stay in the back and they never get talked about again. The action movies that do have character and emotion are the movies that are the most successful. The Dark Knight has that harrowing sequence where the Joker has placed Harvey Dent and Rachel Dawes in 2 separate places, and Batman has to go for one of them and the cops have to go for the other one. And the whole time you're worried about which one of them is going to die. And while they're doing that, they're both telling each other that they love each other because they know one of them is not going to make it, and then one of them genuinely does not make it. The Dark Knight is so successful, not just because the trailer flips or because the Batpod explosion and reveal is so visually stunning, and I love it every time. It's the movie works because it captures your emotions. When they're stuck at the end of the movie and you're seeing the two fairies, and one's got criminals and one's got just regular pedestrian people, and they're emotionally exhausted from this question, should I kill this other person to survive? That movie is rife with emotion and people being forced to make choices. And that emotion is what dials us in. But the difference between The Dark Knight and Blade 2, these are both sequels written by the same guy, David S. Goyer. The difference between them is that Blade is old school. It's done in the format of The Man with No Name. It's done in the format of Clint Eastwood. It's done in the format of Terminator, where the hero does not verbally express himself. Christopher Nolan has the talent of getting his hero to be both visually clear with what he's after, but he also has a speech about what he's doing, so that you as the regular audience member can go, oh yeah, that's what this was about. But you don't get that in old school filmmaking. The whole point of old school filmmaking is that this is a visual medium, right? If you need the dialogue to tell it, then you're not really doing your job. And that's not a stab at Christopher Nolan. That's the old school way of storytelling, where you're supposed to be a thinker as an audience member. You're supposed to think about what you are seeing. And that when someone says something at the beginning of the movie and it comes true at the end of the movie, you're supposed to just remember it on your own and still be affected by it. You don't need to repeat the line, because if the audience member back then reads more books, has a better memory, and really pays attention to the movie. And again, not a knock on Christopher Nolan. He does it excellently. He does it superbly. So this is not a criticism of his work, but this is my point, that the old school way of doing things is visual, because it's a visual medium. You want to say everything and explain it for dummies? Make a podcast or write a book. The movie experience is a visual medium. So you have to intuit. You have to feel it here, and you have to think and pay attention as to what's going on. And even though it's not being said, subconsciously you are absorbing it. So, again, Guillermo del Toro is the one who says, you look at the way Blade kills the vampires in the beginning, and they are doing this, and he is doing it quickly because he doesn't care. His emotion is not there. When we see the fight scene with Nyssa, this is more balletic, and it's a dance. And the way Guillermo del Toro explains action movies, he says that action movies are just dance movies, except instead of dancing, they're fighting. But it's the same principle, where relationships are being made or destroyed because of the action sequence or through the action sequence, which is why Blade 2 is so exceptional. Because where Blade 1, yes, the action still has some level of meaning and build up and it's strong, Blade 2 by far excels in the category of the action really meaning something to the character every single time it happens. So this attention to emotion and intention, if you want to be a director, that's what you have to pay attention to. Because the way you shoot a scene, the way you direct actors, it's going to have everything to do with your point of view on how an action scene is supposed to work. If you watch an action movie, and even if the action is cool and you leave it going, that was okay, the reason you do that is because the action has nothing to do with the story. It's just some cool choreography that stuns you for a minute, and by the time the movie's over, you already forgot what happened. You know what I mean? And let's talk about the visual style of this movie. I'm going to back up from the action for just a second to talk about how I keep saying this movie looks like a painting, right? Again, this is Guillermo del Toro's vision for the movie. Let me tell you, if you want to be a director, your first objective is homework. This is what I learned from Guillermo del Toro. The way he approached directing this movie, the truth, the behind the scenes trivia here is that Guillermo del Toro was asked by David Goyer to direct Blade 1. He had just made his first movie, Kronos, which was a vampire movie about a grandfather who gets bitten by a strange device that turns him into a vampire. But it's a very sweet tale of a grandfather who's taking care of his granddaughter. And over the course of the movie, slowly he turns into a vampire, and even his granddaughter notices. But there's also this kind of corporate villain who lives in his neighborhood, and the villain is Ron Perlman. And the whole movie ends with this epic battle on a rooftop with one of those, I think it's with the bright neon lights, I'm not sure. But either way, it's an epic battle on a rooftop between a grandpa and a younger man. And even though it's not like stunning choreography, there's something that's still very emotional about it, that when the movie ends, you're so like, oh, wow, that happened. But Guillermo del Toro said no because he had just done a vampire movie and he didn't want to go back to back. He wanted to do something different. And this is the true nature of filmmakers. Filmmakers do not like repetition. You look at again, George Lucas. All of his Star Wars movies are different. None of them try to be like the other movie. He knows that he's telling a particular part of his story, and he also wants a specific visual language. He wants a specific environment to that story so that when the audience comes in, they're getting a fresh experience. Again, this is why the sequels fail. If you don't like Disney Plus, this is why Disney Plus Star Wars fails. It is because they are pushing the nostalgia button, thinking that it's a certain sexual organ, and it's not. It's just a button in the brain. It's not the sexual organ. They're pressing the nostalgia button. They're showing you things you've seen before, but in a different tone, and you're supposed to be affected by it. Now, I'm shitting on them, but ironically, maybe 20 years from now, I'll actually like it. So who knows? I know talented filmmakers are making this stuff. I just don't like it. But that being said, if you wonder why does George Lucas's movies, why is it that there's something about them that even though everyone hated the prequels at the time, supposedly, yet now, post sequels, people realize, no, there's something working about the prequels, even though maybe personally I disagree with them. And what's working about it is that he's telling a story. He's telling a story that's fresh every time. You know what I mean? The original trilogy is about the consequences of people who went to war, and some of them got corrupted and made the wrong choice. And the prequel trilogy is about those people and what led them to making the right choice, that good people could be corrupted. The same thing that The Dark Knight is about is what Revenge of the Sith about. The same thing that The Dark Knight is about was accomplished and done with Anakin Skywalker 5 years earlier with Revenge of the Sith. So I just want you, if you're a young filmmaker, you need to abandon social conventions. You need to abandon whatever your favorite YouTuber says. If you really want to be a real filmmaker who makes movies that actually affect people, then you need to stop listening to these yahoos who are just emotional babies crying onto their YouTube channel about how much Star Wars isn't the same anymore. And, too many girls and all this stuff that really has nothing to do with has nothing to do with storytelling. Whether they like it or hate it, they always talk about the plot and they never say the word story because they don't know what story means. So I'm going to reiterate the lesson from the first orientation episode here. Conflict is character, character is story. Meaning a conflict shows you what a character is about and what they care about. That's their concern, it's what they want. And a story is about a character's journey through that conflict. Okay? So when I say that Blade is killing vampires quickly because he's trying to get to Whistler, meaning the action scene has an emotional purpose to our main character. And that the next scene, he's having this sparring session with a vampire doesn't even realize that he's kind of impressed with this chick. And then she pulls off her mask and he has a long stare at her. Which, you know, Blade, if you watch the first one, he don't care about vampires, male or female. If you're a vampire, you're dead to him. But she almost gets him with a killing blow. And he's like, okay. And you're beautiful? Okay. The word okay isn't said, but he has a long look, right? And even she is impressed with him. So it's unspoken, but it's there. And this scene is the beginning of a romantic entanglement between the two of them. It never fully gets expressed. That's the tragedy of the movie. Although a sex scene is written for them, it's never shot because the director's like, look, the movie, this is not a movie where that makes sense to happen. There's not enough time for them to develop that. So they can't have a sex scene. They can't even really have a kiss scene because there's no room in the movie for that to feel natural to what's going on. Which again, that's Guillermo del Toro. Look, every director, every true director and writer is a film critic who's sick of being a critic because we actually understand what storytelling is and we want to do it ourselves. We have that wild notion of, hey, I can do better than this guy. This guy doesn't know what he's doing with the camera. He don't know what he's doing. And then you're going to go test your own mettle to see if you can do it. And Del Toro is clearly a guy who can do it. So when I tell you that one of the most successful directors of our time right now, the inspiration of so many artists, that when people work with him, they're happy to work with him because they know they're working with someone who genuinely cares about his art and he's a genuine human being from what I've heard. When I tell you that, that is what you need to think about when you're thinking about movies and how you're going to approach them. That you have to be a human being, but you also have to genuinely care about movies enough to discern that is character happening, is storytelling happening? Because if it isn't, that's why you don't like the movie. Or maybe it is happening, but you're just not reading it correctly because you think storytelling is supposed to work a certain way. So that's why I'm making this video, just to kind of break you out of whatever mold you might be in that you're thinking about. Action movies, the action scenes themselves, when done properly, have everything to do with character and what they care about and how they will change. So this sparring session that ends with a stalemate is what? It's the seed of the beginning of a romantic relationship between Blade and a vampire. And why is that so important? Because we know from the first movie and the opening sequence of this movie that Blade literally could give less than a shit about a vampire. But for this one vampire woman who almost killed him, he has pause. And just like with the pause for Whistler, his pause means something. So this is just something to think about. I want you to understand that when you make an action movie, the action has everything to do with character. And Del Toro, again, one of the most successful filmmakers of our time. Not that he makes the most money. He's still always indie-minded. He always tells his own story. But he's one of those directors that you know by name or you've heard about because he understands that storytelling is an emotional experience that the audience has. That your job is, even as an action director, even though the story might not really be that deep, there should still be a story there, and that you're taking the audience on this emotional ride. Because later on in the movie, Blade will be looking out for Nyssa. He will be telling her, hey, these weapons that we're using to kill these zombie vampires, because this is what starts this action scene is there's trying to sneak in. It doesn't really make any sense. And this is what Guillermo del Toro explains. The screenplay for Blade 2, as far as del Toro was concerned, really didn't make much sense when you look at it. So his job as a director, not that it was necessarily a bad script, just that it had things in it that didn't make sense. So everything that didn't make sense, he looked at as an opportunity. Well, hey, at me as a director, okay, if this is supposed to be an action scene, then I'm going to approach this a certain way. And that goes, I've talked a lot about character, but let's also talk about the visuals, how the movie looks, when we see this painter-like style, right? That's part of the attractiveness of the movie, is how good it looks. Guillermo del Toro has a story he talked about once where he had a friend, another filmmaker, who was really arrogant, and he was talking about how he made this movie for $10,000. And Del Toro looked at the movie and he said, "Yeah, it looks like it cost $10,000," meaning it looked cheap, meaning it didn't look very good. It didn't look cinematic. And his point was, look, it's not just ego here, but when I make my movies, I may also have $10,000, but my job as a director is to make the movie look like it cost $1,000,000, like to make it look like it cost $20 million. Your job as the director is to make the movie hit a visual standard that the audience accepts that it's a professional movie that they should be seeing on the big screen. But B, it's like it's gotta really have a voice and a character. It's gotta really have a point of view that you're seeing through, and point of view is so important. So Guillermo del Toro's approach to this movie visually, Del Toro, like Tim Burton, is a big art student. He really does. He's always loved art. He studied art, painting specifically, since he was a kid. And his approach to the visual style of this movie was say, I want to make a chiaroscuro movie. Chiaroscuro means the relationship between light and dark. And specifically, there's a painting by Caravaggio. I forget his first name, but Caravaggio, the painter, has a painting called God Calls on Matthew or something, Saint Matthew. Something about the disciple of Jesus. And Matthew is a lawyer who then becomes a disciple of Jesus. But this painting, which uses the chiaroscuro technique, the relationship between light and dark, it shows a very dark room, but this bright, warm light coming through the window that centers around a lone child who's sitting at the end of the table looking down. And the child is just kind of doing his own thing, but the light coming in from outside. And this is a beautiful image. You see it, you're going to be arrested with, hopefully not like this, you're going to be arrested with awe, because it's a beautiful painting. And I forget the name of it. But the point of it is that the light, okay, this is symbolism. The light represents God's light. It's God looking upon Saint Matthew, knowing that someday he'll be the disciple of Jesus. And so the relationship between light and dark is like this one child alone in a dark room. Even this kid has a grand destiny far beyond his understanding right now. Which again is kind of a lot of religious sermons, like what you go through in life, you don't know how it plays into the larger tapestry of God's plan. So all of this is very much implied. You have to pull it out of the image. You can't just know it by looking at it automatically, unless you have that mindset, the religious mindset of how God's miracles work, right? So I want you to think about that is Del Toro's entire way that he looks at how he shoots movies. Okay, everything in the frame, mise en scene, everything in the frame tells the story, meaning that the meaning of your story is told entirely by how you choose the lights, how you choose the block, which means where you put the actors in front of the camera, how you choose to have the camera move or not move. Every single thing should have a meaning when you're making a scene. So that's what if you want to be a professional, and look, I'm not promising to make you a professional, but what I'm trying to get you to do as an artist is to have the professional mindset. If you have the professional mindset, then you can become one. I have a story where I almost became an industry professional and I fumbled the ball, but that's a story for my other podcast I'll get to at some point. But the fact of the matter is, I would have never had that opportunity if I didn't have the professional mindset of saying, when I make my stuff. I'm going to approach it with a vision. I'm going to know the look of the movie. I'm going to know what the look of the movie means. And I'm going to know that when I move the camera or when I don't move the camera, where I put actors in front of the camera, every single thing has a purpose and a point. That as a director is your job. And when I direct action and the how we get into the action, what happens within the action scene, and how it affects the rest of the story, all of that is crucial to your storytelling job. So I just like action movies that are dumb and stupid. Well, I hope to God you never make one. So if you're a director, that is not your attitude. Or if it is your attitude, good luck. Maybe you'll still succeed. You might be fine. But at least know what you're doing. So my goal here is not to turn you into a little Guillermo del Toro. My goal with this whole podcast is to tell you different directors' approaches, because that's what I learned. Before I even went to film school, I had basically 5 years of watching DVD commentaries, watching all different directors talk about how their visions, either they got to keep their vision, or sometimes their vision or their script was changed by the studio. And then you look at how the movie turns out. And then I, as the audience member / person who wants to be a filmmaker, I decide for myself, well, maybe the studio was right. I'm going to talk a little bit about Daredevil for a second here. A lot of people say the director's cut of Daredevil is the superior cut. I actually firmly disagree with that. This is not a popular opinion. I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to tell you how an artist should be thinking. And I'm my own artist. I have my own point of view. And my point of view is that the deleted scenes from Daredevil, I think, are deleted for a reason. Although I'm not necessarily a fan of studio meddling, I do genuinely feel like the theatrical version of Daredevil is the best version of that movie. I feel that movie keeps the emotions tight. It's not a movie that makes any sense, even with the deleted scenes. I really don't think the deleted scenes help the movie. I just don't think they work. And that's my personal opinion. You don't have to agree with it. But when I look at the two different versions, I see that the studio did help him make a better movie. And I can't say that that's true for Fantastic Four. 20th Century Fox, very notorious for their meddling. But I do feel like in the case of Daredevil, you see what the deleted scenes give you, and I don't think we got that much out of them. But there's another action movie where, again, action tells the story. Daredevil starts off that movie killing criminals, and by the end of the movie, he stops doing that. And that's an arc that I think even though it's not a perfect movie, the action is totally a part of the storytelling. But the reason nobody messes with Blade 2 is because Del Toro is the superior storyteller. And this is no shade on Mark Steven Johnson. I don't know what he's doing. I hope he's still working, because his visual style for Daredevil was exceptional. I mean, he's a director, but I don't know beyond that what's up with him. But nonetheless, Del Toro clearly the stronger storyteller, and working with the studio that let him tell the story. So that's two things that are very important. Like, if the studio truly believes in you, and this is why Del Toro and Christopher Nolan are so famous, it's because, look, they're able to go talk to these guys in suits and convince them that, look, I am right, and you need to trust me, and people will get this movie the way I'm making it. And then when the movie actually succeeds, that's proof in the pudding. Like, hey, we put you through hell. We challenged every single idea you had, or we challenged some of the big ones that you didn't want us to change. And look, you were right. So now we're going to let you make your next movie how you want. Then that's the vetting system of the studios. That's how it used to be. Now you can make a TikTok video that's so popular that studios will dump money on you and then wonder why the movie's no good. Well, the movie's no good because you don't understand how filmmakers make movies. Storytelling in the film format is not a meme. It's not a passing joke. If you want to affect people, you want to make a comedy, drama, action, whatever it is, you need to understand your genre. You need to understand what the best directors do with it. And that's how you're going to be the superior storyteller. If you, this is my opinion on filmmaking, and this is my opinion on art. You can be proud of something, or you can actually want to watch it. And this is kind of what I'm learning with this whole podcasting process, is that I've realized I'm really bad at making thumbnails. And a thumbnail is a huge part of getting someone to click on your video, right? And I hit the point with my thumbnails where I'm like, look, I'm very proud of all this complicated photoshopping I did to put all this imagery in the thumbnail. But if I step back and really look at the thumbnail and I ask myself, okay, I'm proud of this, but is this even a video I would click on? The answer is no. I would not click on this video. And then I do it again and I make a much simpler thumbnail and I realize, okay, I would watch this. I would click on this at least. And I don't know why I didn't approach the thumbnails that way sooner, because the truth of the matter is that's always how I approach editing and directing, is like, look, would I watch this movie if I wasn't proud of it? You know what I mean? Like, you have to ask, if your goal is to be hired by people, if your goal is to be taken seriously by industry professionals, if your goal is to be taken seriously by audience members who watch your stuff, then you have to have the mental and emotional clarity and confidence. And it hurts, okay? It hurts. There's a phrase in screenwriting that says sometimes you have to kill your darlings. Sometimes you might like something, but if it holds your movie back, it becomes a deleted scene. Okay? That's why we have deleted scenes. If it holds back the movie is the most important thing. It's more important than you. It's more important than your ego. The movie is the most important thing. If it holds back your movie, then it's got to go. It's got to go. It's got to go. So I just I've only talked about 2 action scenes, but everything else that I've talked about here is the director's job. Now, I'm going to skip a little ahead here. The plot of the movie is that the vampires show up to tell Blade that they need to work together because a new worse vampire shows up called the Reapers. What? Ooh, excuse me. A new vampire shows up called the Reapers, and these are some kind of mutation that's basically kind of a zombie vampire. It's kind of a vampire that also feeds on other vampires, as I mentioned earlier in this review. And Blade has to team up with what's called the Blood Pact, and it's this group of vampires that were initially training to hunt Blade, because Blade has been killing vampires so successfully for so many years, and the vampire community has had enough. He is the boogeyman to them. But ultimately, because of the emergence of this Reaper, this zombie vampire, they have no choice but to team up with the ultimate vampire hunter to get rid of this freak situation that they're dealing with. And there's a particular sequence where it's toward the end of the movie. We've had a few action scenes. I don't need to really get into them. They're cool. There's some character building and all that. But there's a particular sequence that this is one of those foundational points for me as a young director that I took into my first short film. And basically, after encountering the Reapers a couple times and learning how they work, that they're immune to everything but sunlight. So Blade uses silver, he uses garlic, that kills most vampires, but when it comes to these Reapers, they're immune to that, and sunlight is literally their only weakness. So they develop the sun grenade, basically a ultraviolet grenade that'll blast light in order to kill these vampires. And they do an autopsy of a dead Reaper and discover that even the dead Reaper's body is still alive and craves blood, but they use the chemical makeup of the Reaper to develop something to attract Reapers. So it's a scent-based attraction. So, this is very cool. This is very cool. They're thinking about how to trap a vampire zombie. You know what I mean? It's very cool. This movie's full of coolness, cool weapons, cool action, very stylized stuff. And but back to style, also, not only did Del Toro approach the chiaroscuro, but when I talk about that shot where Blade flips out of off the top floor of the building and he does the anime drop and the camera's following him, Del Toro visually is also doing anime. He's a big anime fan, so he basically visually combined anime with Renaissance painting styles. So yeah, everything in this movie is cool, and it's cool for a reason, because that's his reference point. And I'm going to get to the homework very soon. But I want to talk about this scene, the suit up sequence. So essentially, now that they have the tools they need to wipe out the Reapers, because they're going to attract them all to one spot and use a massive light grenade setup to just blast them all at once and just end this once and for all. But we get this whole heroic suit up sequence where we watch the Blood Pact put on all this body armor, and essentially what happens with the camera is that the camera will go from a dark shadow of a pillar, wrap around one of the actors who's suiting up, and then it'll push into all of their armor is black, and it'll push into the darkness of their armor and pull out of the dark shadow of another actor's armor as he's suiting up. And as we do this rotation about 4 or 5 times, and it's very cool. The music's okay, but the sequence, the visual building of the sequence is very cool. And Del Toro talked about this scene too, as like, he personally doesn't like suit up sequences in movies, but he was like, how can I approach this so that I like it? And he came up with this whole notion of going from darkness into darkness. And this is not a new technique. This is something filmmakers often will do in order to make their cuts, and they want to have some kind of smooth transition. It's going from shadow to shadow to hide their cuts. Not really to hide the cut, but sort of to have a nice sort of disguised smooth cut. This is what directors can do when they understand the editing process. And here's where craft matters. If you're a director, you should know how to write a screenplay. You should, my personal point of view, you should know how to read a screenplay. You should know if a screenplay makes sense or not, which is what Del Toro did. If something didn't make sense in the script, he either tried to rewrite it, tried to get David Gore to rewrite it, or he tried to justify it with superior directing, just to make it make sense for the audience member. That's your job as a director. If it don't make sense in the script, it's not going to make sense to the audience. So you are the person who's in charge of the presentation of this movie. If it does not make sense, you have to make it make sense. That's your job. This is the industry expectation of you as a director, and this is the audience's expectation of your film. That I have found as a video editor, 10 times out of 10, if the audience just understands what's going on, even if it's kind of subconscious, if the audience just kind of gets what's going on, they will be way more into the movie than if they don't understand what's going on. Or if it's not emotionally attached, like if the action scene doesn't affect the rest of the story, then the audience is going to check out, and they're going to say, well, it was too much plot, or it wasn't enough plot. And they don't even know what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying. But what they mean is that I didn't feel anything for this movie. You know, it was a bunch of cool stuff, I guess, but I don't get what was going on. And what they mean is I'm not dialed in. I'm not emotionally into this movie. And your job as a director is to get them emotionally in. And you do have to have visual flair in an action movie. It's required. But you can decide how that visual flair looks. If you look at Bourne Identity, that is one of the movies that changed action movies from the moment it came out, because this was a dirty action movie. There was shaky cam. We had Jason Bourne using household items as weapons, which is something that they did progressively across the sequels. And the shaky cam, that kind of feeling like you're there in the action scene, it became a style that informed the Dark Knight trilogy. Okay, so That is a choice to do things that way. But when Guillermo del Toro does his very smooth anime shots, that's a choice as a director to make the movie that way. He didn't have to do that. Born Identity came out. He could have just copied Born Identity and said, well, this blade's going to be an intense, you're on the ground with it. He didn't do that. Homework. The way Del Toro approached making this movie was that he watched all of the dailies of Blade 1. And what are dailies? For those of you who don't know, dailies, as the word implies, it's the daily footage of every single shoot day. So when you shoot a scene in a movie, you shoot multiple angles, you get multiple takes, you shoot all different kinds of angles that may or may not be used by the editor. It's the editor who's going to shape the movie and make sure whatever's in it matters. But so Del Toro had this approach of, I'm going to look at every single daily so I can just absorb, what is this movie supposed to look like and feel like? You know, what am I supposed to, what is the language of a Blade movie? And so by watching all the dailies, he got the full sense of the vision of Blade, not just watching the movie, but watching the raw footage. He got a complete sense of what they were going for stylistically. And so it's like, I can now match this style and make a Blade movie. But then, because now I know the rules of Blade and the visual idea about it, I can take the next step and say, well, as a director, I'll just take it more in the direction of anime, but still going to use the film language of Blade. So he did heavy homework in watching all that footage, just to have the mentality of a Blade movie be in his brain. You know, when they people talk about Heath Ledger and locking himself up in a room, that's what it took to have the mentality of Joker that he wanted to achieve. And it's successful. He didn't give any of his fellow cast members dead animals, but he did put himself in a room to experience loneliness. In the movie A Real Pain, it's unstated, but Kieran Culkin's character is homeless, and he's just not saying it. But me, living in San Francisco, seeing homeless people, and even meeting a guy who was kind of couch surfing a lot in his life, I saw all the hallmarks of homelessness. And I was right. And I learned later on from a friend that Kieran Culkin actually went homeless legitimately just to get where the character was coming from. So his performance was informed, an informed performance. What do they call that? An educated guess, right? Meaning you know something about what you're talking about before you make a guess. So as an actor, Kieran Culkin became informed. So when Guillermo del Toro watches all the daily footage of Blade, so he knows every single shot, every single take, every attempt to make a visual style, whether it was in the movie or not, he's making an informed decision on how to make Blade 2. But then he also brings himself into the project. He brings his own point of view. Well, I like anime and Renaissance paintings, and I would like to not lose the language of Blade, but enhance it with this approach by making it's the first Blade movie already kind of has this style. I'm going to lean in on that and make that an intentional style for the whole movie, but I'm also going to add this anime-ness to the camera angle and how it moves around the action, so that I can create a very different energy, so it's alive, it feels fresh, and it's entertaining for me, right? And Jordan Peele talks about this. I just saw a clip from him on Instagram talking about writing Get Out. He's like, when I write, it's got to be fun for me, otherwise it's not going to be fun for the audience. So that's what the director has to think. What's fun for me? What do I appreciate when I see it in movies? And that's something so important for you to understand if you want to make movies, or if you're already making them and you just, why is my short film, nobody likes it? Why is it that I shot an action scene? People like action, but nobody cares about my movie. Why? And it's because it all comes down to your homework, your perspective, and your attention to the industry standard. Okay, you have to know that it doesn't matter what your movie costs. You got to make it look like it costs $2 million. All right. And so that's something I learned when I made 007 I Only Need One. I watched every single James Bond movie, with the exception of two, but they were not canon. And I would listen to the James Bond theme songs every single day until I finished editing. So that was almost a year straight of watching Bond movies, watching Bond scenes, listening to Bond music, just so that it was always in the cadence of my mind when I approached that movie. And I want to get back to this suit up sequence, okay? So all of that homework is informing Guillermo del Toro into what he's doing, but he's also understanding director craft. How do I make this suit up sequence something that I want to watch? I'm going to go from shadow to shadow, and not only that, the way he shot it. Okay, young directors, this is the part you need to pay attention to. The way Guillermo del Toro shot the scene was in camera editing. What does that mean? That means that he shot every shot in the order it was going to be shown in when it's cut. And this is an old technique that this goes back to the beginning of film. In camera editing doesn't mean you're chopping up the film inside the camera. It means that you're shooting intentionally, knowing that one shot will lead to the next shot, and that you're literally shooting them in the order they're supposed to appear, so that you could literally just shoot exactly the amount of footage you need from beginning to end, and you know that it's going to go to the next shot from beginning to end. And when you print that film and it comes out, you can play it and it will play in order, cut. It's like pre-cut. You don't even need an editor to cut it for you, practically. Of course, you still need that in today's time, but that's something to think about in camera editing. So if you go, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find these scenes on YouTube and I'm going to put them in the description so that you can watch them yourself. And then I encourage you to watch the commentary for this movie, because if you want to be a director and if you want to be a successful director, you need to listen to other successful directors. Remember, I talked about John Woo. He's one of the greatest action movie directors of all time. And he cares about emotion and the action scene having an emotional experience that tells the story. So that's John Woo. And now I'm talking about Blade 2, directed by Guillermo del Toro, one of the most successful directors of our current generation. And he cares about emotion and action being a part of telling the story. And not only that, as a craftsman, he knows all these different things about how to make a movie, including in-camera editing. So why is in-camera editing important? Because this is how I approached my first short film, that Romeo and Juliet scene that I talked about. I couldn't believe what Del Toro said, is that when I was 13 years old, I don't think I even had a computer yet. I'm not sure, but it definitely wasn't a computer that had an editing program. I'd never touched an editing program before. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. But all of a sudden, this notion of what in-camera editing, meaning you can just shoot each shot in order. So if you visualize your shots and know what shot leads to the next, that essentially you don't even have to edit. You could just shoot something in order. And I did do tape-to-tape editing, recording things on TV and putting scenes where I want them. I did a little bit of that. But in no way did I know how to edit a movie, or let alone shoot one. But the whole notion that if you just think of your shots ahead of time and then shoot them in order, you don't even have to edit, because you're essentially designing the shot to end where the next shot starts, so that when the viewer watches it, they're having a fluid experience. And with that in mind, that made filmmaking possible for me. I was like, I can take a video camera and come up with the visual, how I'm going to shoot it, and shoot in order. And when it comes out, people can just watch it like a Pop-Tart, like presto, instant movie. And that sat in my gut for not even a whole year, like maybe 8 months before I went to high school. And then this opportunity came. And I think it was about a year, actually, by the time I actually did it. But then this opportunity came. Hey, class, we're going to do a video project. And Miss Reed shows previous examples. Look, all you have to do is stand there with a book in your hand and read the scene. And she's not saying this, but I realize this is a confidence building exercise. She did a lot of things like that, like making us cheer every time someone did speak in front of the class as a confidence building exercise, which is, it's a good life skill to have, to be able to speak in front of people and to speak clearly. And that's part of what this video project was. It was like, you know, rather than making everyone read a scene in front of everybody, make them do it on video. And then again, video is a good skill to have in this modern age, that video is becoming accessible to regular people on a scale hitherto unheard of. And so when this opportunity happens, like, and I had my group and I was like, I have an idea of how to do this. Can I just be in charge? And everyone just said, yeah. No one cared. It's homework, right? And so, you know, and I did my homework, where it's like I came up with the shots. In this case, I didn't know storyboarding, so I didn't, you know, I didn't storyboard, but I just visualized it. I visualized in my head, how do I want this to look? How do I want this to move? What do I want the music choices to be? Because by this point, I have started listening to movie scores. It all started with The Matrix, which will be the next video. It all started with The Matrix. You know, I loved that score, and then I listened to the Blade 2 score. I loved the Terminator 3 score, even though I didn't like the movie. I loved the score. And so I was just visualizing what my shots would be. And what we had was the end of the play, the very last scenes of the play, where Romeo goes to visit Juliet. And although it's not in the movie, in the play, the character who is supposed to marry Juliet, which is what makes her fake kill herself, he's actually there mourning her. And Romeo shows up, and immediately the guy she was supposed to marry, not knowing she's already married to Romeo, tries to go, oh, you're a criminal, you're exiled, I'm going to fight you to make sure that you don't desecrate this scene of my beloved. And Roman's like, no, she's my beloved, get out of here. And then they fight to the death. And then it followed up by him taking the poison and then dying as she wakes up. And so, not that I did it super well, but every single shot was planned ahead of time. And I knew where the cuts were going to be. So this was my first opportunity to do it. And I did my homework we were going to do it. We couldn't do it at my house. So I was like, who's willing to let us shoot at your house, and who has a camera? And luckily one of the classmates in my team, she had just moved in, or they were painting her house or something. So it was kind of looking very nice and clean right now. And she had her father's video camera, which was a videotape. Actually, it was a mini tape, but it was still using like the videotape camcorder. So she had everything, and all I had to do, and I was like, can I use it? Sure, you know? And so the night before we shot, I came in to look at the place just so I knew where I was going to be shooting, and I could really, now I'm going to actually visualize in the real place it's going to be. And I got to look at the camera and I could test it real quick. Like, how does it shoot? How does it record? Is there a delay? Because I know when I did my tape-to-tape recordings from what I videotaped off of TV, I knew that there was always that little delay, and it had the exact same time delay as the regular VHS tape. So I could factor that into my plan. And so what I did was I visualized every shot, how it began, what music was going to be under that scene, and I would literally time when I cut to the music so that the music would continue into the next shot. And when we did that, it was successful. For the most parts, the music cuts were very smooth. There was a couple times where it was off because my timing was off, but yeah, for the most part. And I decided to shoot it so that you never actually saw the book in their hands. There was one shot where it was unavoidable. I forget what happened, but you see the book in her hand. But for the most part, I was just like, look, I know this is not going to be an Oscar-winning movie, but I don't want to see that freaking book in your hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot around the book, and all you got to do is read it. And then people will hopefully feel like they're watching a movie when they watch this. And the beautiful thing is, when it played, here's the funny story behind it. I knew I had something even though I didn't look at it again. But when my classmate came in, she was like, I watched it with my dad, we liked it. I was like, oh, that's a good sign. You know what I mean? The fact that you're in it, and I know I'd be self-conscious if I was on camera. The fact that you're in it and you like it, good sign. And so I went to my teacher and I said, hey, can we play this last? And she said, sure. And I know she was trying to be coy, but she ended up playing it first. And I think she thought I was asking for it to be played last because I was insecure. But actually, it was because I was excited. I thought this should be the last one to play because this is going to be an event. If it goes well, if it goes the way I planned it, this is going to be an event. And you know what? It played first and right from the start. That was all I needed to hear. You know what I mean? It looks like a real movie. Now, again, if you watch this Romeo and Juliet video, you're going to be like, okay, that looks like crap. But consider that every video afterward was just the camera on a tripod and people going, and I don't like you, Tybalt, but I'm doing all this camera work and it's very dark and it does kind of look cinematic and you have this dramatic music underneath everything, and then there's sound effects and people are running and hiding and the camera's moving with them and doing things. And you know, granted, it does look dated and bad, but you can tell, especially the way it ends. I had this vision that the last shot should be Romeo and Juliet laying next to each other, their hands clasped with this particular music, and I'm just gonna back up from their hands to see all of them, and the camera will finally pull away back into the darkness behind the wall. And the music will swell, and that's going to be the end of the movie. And when that happened, literally the classroom clapped, and everyone was like, oh no, now they have to show my video. You know what I mean? Like, in every video afterward, yes, da 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 da. One person had some editing. Their uncle was a video guy, but it was still the same thing. Yeah, da 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 da. Juliet Romeo, blah 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 blah. Video's over. You know what I mean? So, you know, that was a testament to me. Like, here I am, 13. Yeah, I think I'm still 13 years old at the time of this video. And I applied what Guillermo del Toro taught me, looking at the visual style, thinking about how the shot began and ended. And this is my homework for you. If you're watching this, you want to be a director and you want to learn how it works, this is my homework for you. Pick a scene from any movie or anything. Pick any kind of scene. Doesn't matter if it's dialogue or not. And come up with all of the shots and do this trick. Do the in-camera editing style. Think about how your shot begins. Think about how it ends. If you want to play music live and do what I did, you can. That's fine. But think about how the shot begins. Think about how it ends. Shoot the next shot. Try to make a smooth experience so that when you play all the shots in order, it tells one complete story. This is my homework for you. And if you do this, please link me in the comments. I would like to see your first experiment with in-camera editing. And certainly you can do some more research on it. Look into more what in-camera editing entails. Or you can watch my Romeo and Juliet video. Or you can watch Blade 2. You can watch the scenes that should be linked down below. And look at that. When you know that this is how this Academy Award-winning successful director who made Blade a staple. Blade was already a staple with the first movie, but Blade 2 was the staple that sort of lifted Blade up from just this one cult classic to this, you know, now 2-hitting franchise. You know what I mean? Like, this is what a great director does because he knows the tricks of the trade. He knows what you can do with the camera. He knows what a director is supposed to know about editing. You can shoot a whole scene and edit it however you want. But if you're a true director, you can also shoot it completely in order if you want. And you know what? This is also in-camera editing. That's what Robert Rodriguez did with his first movie, El Mariachi. So Robert Rodriguez made Sin City. He made Spy Kids. He made Planet Terror. He's made so many awesome movies. And so these are the greats. These are the great filmmakers of now a previous generation, and we're coming into new filmmakers who are going to change the game again. These are what the great filmmakers know and understand about filmmaking. If you want that for your future, and be okay with failure also. If you do it and it sucks, that's okay, but try. Just try. Learn the craft. Learn how it works. So please, if you want to be a director and you've never shot anything before, try this out. It's a great first experiment, because what I did, doing that first time became how I looked at every movie. I didn't try in-camera editing ever again because it's so much work. But I still thought every shot needs to lead to the next shot. And that's how you create visual storytelling for your characters. Because let me tell you, even outside of this scene, the way Guillermo del Toro shot the movie was that he thought about every single shot needs to lead to the next shot. And not just in literally the actor walks left to right and then appears left to right again, but just that what you're getting out of that image, when you get to the next image, it should be building that emotion. It should be building the feeling, and that the way you shoot one scene should lead into the next scene. But sort of the best practice for understanding that is doing an in-camera editing of a single scene. If you can make a single scene work and make each shot flow to the next shot, thinking about editing, because that's a tool of the director. Think about editing as you direct. Then your editor is simply cutting out the parts of the shot you don't need, right? That's people have credited me, everyone that I've met since I was young, as a good editor. But I edit like a director shoots. I edit to tell a story. And if it doesn't tell the story, it's not in the short, it's not in the documentary, it's not in whatever we're making, okay? And as a director, I take into account that this will be edited. So every shot that I get, I know is going to move to the next shot. Every shot that I get, even if it doesn't seem like it's important for the current scene, will matter to the next scene. And all of this knowledge led to me making the award-winning 007 I Only Need One.
Hello, darling.
Which is up to 20,000 views now on YouTube. It's not the highest viewed video of James Bond fan films, but you know what? This is one that I'm proud of, and I know I would click on, and I'm probably responsible for at least 19,000 of those views. I just gotta admit it. It's probably all me just watching it over and over again. But that's the trick. If you can have the self-honesty to know what works and what doesn't, but also you got to go through the experiences. Because I've made tons of videos that sucked before making 007 I Only Need One, but I also made videos that were very good. You know what I mean? So I knew what worked and what didn't work, and I learned from failure and I learned from success. Failure is so important. You know, the best thing to learn from success is to challenge yourself with something different the next time. And if you fail, then learn from the failure as well. I think, there's some outdated phrases that, you can't learn from success. My first short film was a success. I got an A on that project, okay? And not only was it a success because I got a good grade and the classroom thought it was a real movie. And they knew it's not. They know it could be better and production-wise would be improved. But just the fact that I approached it that way and tried to hide the books and tried to make you feel it like it was a movie, and that the ending shot was so dramatic with beautiful music, that just the fact that I went through all the trouble to make a cinematic experience in the first place, that was a success that told me, okay, I think I might be onto something. And then I made a couple shorts for other classes. They weren't as good, and that's totally fine because I was trying different things. I was trying, like, okay, let's back up from this ultra cinematic style. Let's try a more natural style. And my natural style was not as good. But when I'm stylized, seem to be a better director. And there's a lesson to be learned from that as well. There's something to be said about style and your personality, your voice, lending itself to the movie or the show that you're making. So it's very important to both study what you love. If you like Renaissance paintings, that's a great place to start. You're making a visual medium anyway. Study what you like. If you like documentaries, watch documentaries, whatever it is. And then bring what you like into the movie, but also learn the craft. Try in camera editing. Try different things and watch director commentaries. Try different things that directors do so that you can find A, what works for you, and B, what you enjoy doing. So, and like I said, it all adds up. You know what I mean? What I did at 13 years old, I was the best parts of what I learned, I was still doing at 25 when I made 007 I Only Need One. You know what I mean? And I think that's for the most part, at least the trailer is cinematic. But I do think that's so much closer to what I want to do as a director. It's like really make a stylized, beautiful movie that's action packed, but it also has heart. It does have character, and I will get into that in a future episode. But I just thought Blade 2, this is the foundation of everything that I would learn later. So even though I do have these first two episodes that are sort of breaking you into the mentality of a filmmaker, I just felt like Blade 2 was a perfect episode 3 that would just kind of get you to understand, again, these are the fundamentals. But also we're getting into the more advanced territory of like, look, it's good to understand the fundamentals, but you also have to have a North Star. You have to know, what am I trying to achieve and how do I achieve it? And it's by homework. It's really by homework and knowing what you are capable of doing. And when you put all the different skills and techniques to test, you see what works and what doesn't. Eventually you get to a point of Guillermo del Toro having confidence in himself to make Blade 2. He refused to make Blade 1 because he'd already made a vampire movie and he wanted to do something different. Again, directors, true artists, don't like repetition. It's boring to them. And then again, look at the sequels. Look how they failed because they tried to repeat what was in the nostalgia button instead of telling a story of their own. And I hate to say that because JJ and all these people are talented, but look, that's the truth of the matter, okay? But when you look at Blade 2, it's the confidence of having your own voice. Like Del Toro made 2 more movies before he made Blade 2 that helped him build his craft and build his confidence so that when he came into Blade 2, he really was informed and had experience and knew how to apply his love for film and art even better for Blade 2. And Blade 2 became this playground where now he had more toys and more money than he'd ever had before, and he could actually really experiment and make a fun movie, because he was trying to make a fun movie that was a Blade movie. His literal saying at the start of the commentaries, I wanted to make Blade 2. I didn't want to make Guillermo del Toro's Blade 2. And nonetheless, of course, he's known for making the movie and it's in his style, but it's undeniable. Blade 2, when you watch it, you're not thinking about the director. You're thinking, I'm watching this amazing experience. It feels like the next step from Blade 1. You know what I mean? And that's what because we didn't know the name of Del Toro. A lot of people didn't know that name before Blade 2 came out. And so many more people learned his name after Hellboy came out. So, but that's what it took. It's like he knew that he's making a franchise product that is, and truth be told, Del Toro personally loves monsters. And one of his early directions to Wesley Snipes was, hey, I don't get Blade. I would never make a movie where Blade was the hero. To me, I love monsters. In my own movies that I would make, the monster is the hero. So I'm not really going to tell you what to do as an actor. I'm going to trust you to perform Blade the way you feel he should be performed, which was wonderful. And Wesley Snipes really appreciated that, and you see that he just rocks it as Blade. And there are scenes where Wesley Snipes says, I'm not going to do that because Blade wouldn't do that. And Del Toro respects him and says, okay, Blade's not going to do that, so Whistler will do it instead. And that's a particular scene where there's vampire experimental fetuses. We find out that these zombie reapers are actually an experiment by the upper echelons of the vampire society, and that they're just a failed experiment. They were trying to become immune to every vampire illness, and the one thing they couldn't solve was the sunlight. They're trying to be like Blade, who's immune to everything except for the thirst for blood. That's what they want to be, and yet they can never capture Blade and take his blood and figure out how it works, because Blade's just too damn good. But so then they're trying every other means of getting there, and that's how we got the Reapers. So it's a big twist in the movie, but once the twist is revealed, after all the Reaper vampires are killed, there's a sequence where in the script they discover this little silo of little vampire Reaper fetuses. And in the script, Blade shoots all the fetuses out. Because again, they're vampires. He hates vampires, right? But then when they came to shoot that scene, it was like, Blade wouldn't do that. Essentially saying, Blade wouldn't kill babies. So Blade, as I talked about in the previous video, he has compassion for humanity, but he also has his own perspective on life. Like, the first movie opens up with him as a baby being born and watching his mother die. So there's some kind of sensitivity around that particular part of his life. And it's that experience that makes him save the character Karen, who gets bit by a vampire, which starts everything that happens in Blade 1. So that character history is being honored and respected by Wesley Snipes when he looks at this scene and says, Blade wouldn't do that. And then Del Toro, keeping his word, says, fine. So Whistler's going to do it. And Whistler's got no problem shooting those baby fetuses. But that's just something that's very important for you to understand as a director. You do need to go in with a plan and know what you're going to shoot, how you're going to shoot it. And if you don't know, you better find out when you get there. You know, that's your job. You got to lead this crew and you got to get pages done every single day. But also, you have to be a good listener. And if your main actor, who's also your producer, if your main actor is saying, my character would not do this, you either have to convince them that you're right and they got to do it, or you have to really listen to them and go, you know what, you are right. Your character is not going to do this. Another character will do it. And, you know, there's scenes like that in Blade 1 where Wesley Snipes is like, Blade's not going to have this conversation with this character. And again, it goes to Whistler, Chris Christopherson. And, you know, if you don't know it when you're watching the movie, but it feels right? And then when you hear it, you go, oh, so that was a change. And so this is something that's also important to understand. When you're making a movie, things change, and ideas that you went into it may be different by the time you're actually shooting it. So I wanted to cover all of these bases and introduce the notion of in-camera editing to you, because this is the foundational markers of what I learned about directing. And it was a great directing class for someone who I knew I wanted something to do with movies. I think I want to make them. But until I heard Del Toro's commentary that laid all of this out, I really didn't know what a director did or how they were supposed to look. So this is a perfect way to learn, because it's also so fundamental. Again, if you're approaching an action movie, you need to understand that the action tells a story. And again, even the whole notion of it's action, shooting a gun, something blows up, right? That's an action. It's, you know, and there's effects, but who does it and why? Blade won't kill the fetuses, right? Because he's got a personal reason not to, even if it's not stated. But the other character will. So this tells the action informs the character, or the action is informed by the character. So this is question number 1. How does action define character? Action is all about character. When it's done right, it's done by the top-notch directors, action has everything to do with character. I just want to get you to understand that. Because if you want to make this stuff, or hell, even if you just want to be a reviewer, I think you should have an understanding of what the best filmmakers are thinking of when they make movies. And so when you watch a movie, don't be an idiot. Okay? It's fine. You can be an idiot. Some of my favorite podcasters are openly idiots and they're happy with it. But if you really want to consider yourself someone worth listening to, there's a reason why I don't listen to so many movie reviews, because I just know the reviewer doesn't know what they're talking about. They've never made a movie. They'll never make a movie. They might write books. They might have a podcast that has millions of followers. But you know what? They don't even know that they are misleading those followers. Some of those followers are going to go make a movie that makes no goddamn sense, and they're not going to wonder why, because their favorite podcaster clearly thinks this about movies. So that's the way you think about movies. Fuck that. You want to be a filmmaker, you want to make movies, you want to be in the industry. I can't promise you what I'm saying is going to get you there, but I promise you that this mentality, learn from filmmakers. Learn from the guys who are in the industry. They're giving you their commentaries. Some of these commentaries are already on YouTube. Learn from the people who actually made the movie, what they went through, what decisions were changed, and that's going to tell you what works in a movie. You watch enough of them, and you're going to have a whole bunch of knowledge in your utility belt that when you approach to make a movie, or even when you're reviewing it, you're going to go, oh, okay, like, you know what? Del Toro did this in Blade 2, so I'm going to approach shooting this scene like that. And, Christopher Nolan used this kind of camera angle in that scene, and he reversed time because it made sense for the story. So I'm going to do that in this scene. When you can play with other directors' choices and at the end find your voice, that's what we're going to try to work toward, okay? If you want to be a filmmaker, you need to learn from other filmmakers, but at the same time, by doing the things they do, some of it's going to work for you, some of it won't. And once you figure out both, you'll find your voice and how do you like to make movies. Because ultimately, what's going to get audiences to sit down and go, it's a real movie. It's the fact that you understand your craft, you do your homework, and ultimately you find what works for you as a storyteller. So that's my lesson for today. I talked about Blade 2, not even all of it, but just the important parts, because I want to help you be a better filmmaker. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you see you next time. And if you do your homework, if you do any kind of short that's in-camera editing and whatever, I want to see it. So please leave a comment like, hey, I did it. I made my first in-camera editing short. Just post your YouTube link in the comments and let me know what it is and how long it is so I can manage my time. If it's please, let's aim for 5 minutes, okay? Don't go past 5 minutes, and just make sure it's a YouTube video that I can click on. I don't want no Vimeo. I don't want no website link, okay? It doesn't even need music. Just attempt the process, of what I talked about in this episode. And in-camera editing is the only thing you have to achieve. Think about your shots, how one leads to the other, and think about how it begins and how it ends, and that's your homework. That's all you have to achieve. It doesn't need great sound design. It doesn't need music. I just want to see what you come up with creatively. If you come up with the whole package, that's great. But I'm not even asking for that. I just want you to practice this important tool for you as potentially you could be the next Spielberg. I don't even know, but it might be you. But you won't find that out unless you start from the fundamentals of filmmaking and learn how it works. So I want to see what you got. Please link your videos below if you make them. And if you enjoy this, please like and subscribe, because that'd be cool. All right, so thank you for watching. I know this was a long one. Thank you very much. Aloha, and I'll catch you next time.
All those bullets, and I only need one.